that we're dealing with essentially a worst case scenario. I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with essentially a worst case scenario. I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with essentially a worst case scenario. I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with essentially a worst case scenario.
I think truth is good for kids. We're so busy lying, we don't even recognize the truth no more in society. We want everybody to feel good. That's not the way life is.
But you can tell if someone's lying, you know, you can sort of feel it in people. And I have lied. I'm sure I'll lie again. I don't want to lie, you know, I don't think I'm a liar. I try not to be a liar. I don't want to be a liar. I think it's like really important not to be a liar.
Hello, Thomas. It's like one more minute, and then we'll be there.
Hi, Jay.
I can hear you.
The rules, protect yourself at all times. Follow my instructions. Keep it clean. Touch gloves if you wish.
It's just the beginning. It'll be over in like 1 minute.
This is so crazy. Like,
No problem. I'd like to watch.
This is so crazy.
Just do whatever you like.
So nervous. Like, what in the world, man?
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really excited to be here this afternoon. It's hard to say that this is some kind of work when you get the opportunity to talk to someone like Thomas Binder, MD, from Switzerland. It is a rare opportunity to talk to someone who wasn't enchanted by this elaborate theater, that wasn't trapped inside of it. Thomas Binder is somebody that since the very beginning of my knowing who he was at the top of the wave up here. He has been staying focused on the biology. He hasn't taken the bait on television, and he's loved his neighbors. That's how we get through this, and I think more than almost anyone, except for maybe Mike Eden or somebody else, I really have been following Thomas for a long time, and it is a great privilege to be able to talk to him today. You can find all of the stuff that I do at GigaohmBiological.com. I'm not going to waste time running through that too long. Thank you very much to the people that subscribe. I am going to go rather quick, and I'll put that up at the end. This is a production of the independent bright web, not to be confused with the intellectual dark web. We are a group of people that's just trying to get the truth out. And the truth is that this is an illusion that is sustained only through your active participation. And so we've all got to help each other to drop our hands from our faces and to engage in united non-compliance. And I'm hoping that our guest is going to be able to give us a unique insight into what he saw in Switzerland and looking outward toward the rest of Europe and toward the rest of the world, what he saw on TV, what he saw on social media that would have led people in Switzerland to believe that a pandemic was even occurring. You guys are very familiar with the fact that we more or less were told that hello, this is Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information brief brought to you by a biologist. We were told in the United States that something terrible was happening in New York City, and if we didn't lock down for 15 or 30 days and close schools, that what happened in New York City was going to spread all around the United States. And luckily, despite all of the resistance and all of the conservative idiocy and all of Trump's missteps, we were able to somehow avoid what happened in New York City happening everywhere else in America. And we haven't been able to really get a good explanation for that. And I'm wondering what they saw in Switzerland. I'm wondering what they used as a worst case scenario over there. And without further introduction, I think I'm just going to slide this window. I got to push you over here. That means I need to pull this window up over there and make it big. Hello, Thomas. I'm going to switch over to this side. I'll put myself on the bottom down here. And if you could just introduce yourself, a lot of people on that watch my stream would already know who you are. And then just kind of, tell us where you're at and what you think is the best way out, because I think that's where we need to go as quick as possible. We only have you for like an hour, and I want to talk about forward-thinking solutions to the problem that we're in. But welcome. Thank you very much for being here.
Hi, Jay. Thank you for having me and for your more than kind introduction, of course. Yeah, well, I study medicine in Zurich, Switzerland. Then I was not sure whether I should go into research or into clinics. So I spent a year in the department for immunology and virology, and I wrote my thesis there. So I have the background in that area as well. But then I decided, I should become a clinician. So I specialized first in internal medicine and then in cardiology. During that time, I worked in hospitals for about 10 years. And then I was always the kind who questioned authority. This is not a good idea if you want to make a academic career. So I decided very early that I would get a broad education, as broadly as possible, but then I should open my private practice, and I did this 6 years ago. I'm working in my cardiology practice, where I'm sitting now here in Wettingen. That's also close to Zurich in Switzerland. And I'm also somewhat an internist, a GP for some of my cardiology patients. Yeah, well, it was the same everywhere, of course. I mean, the first confrontation with this alleged pandemic, also in Switzerland, of course, were these pictures, these videos from Wuhan. But I found instantly, they are strange. Huh? I mean, that was really too much. I mean, these hordes running around in penguin suits. There were they showed us cannons mounted on lorries that sprayed something in the air, allegedly disinfectants, and people that allegedly died suddenly in the streets. But if you looked at these YouTube videos, you realized that they are always landing on their hands. So this was all fake. This I realized instantly that these are not measures against the virus. These are pictures that are directed against the people, propaganda. At that time, of course, I didn't know whether these propaganda was directed against the Chinese populace and just spread around the world, or against the whole populace of the whole world. But I smelled there is something wrong going on. And of course, it reminded me of the last alleged pandemic, the scamdemic, that was the swine flu scam in 2009. But then there was rather silence here in Switzerland for about a month. And then suddenly, sometime in February, I woke up with the news, now the virus is in Bergamo. And Bergamo is in northern Italy, about 15 kilometers from the Swiss border where I live. So the Swiss were terrified, of course. And at the same time, we got information from Wuhan that they were successful in their heroic war against the virus. So I was amazed how obviously almost everybody here in Switzerland thought, then we have to do the same as the Chinese did. We have to install these same unscientific, insane measures against the virus. And I couldn't understand the world because everything I had learned in medical school during my scientific education, in my practical medical life, was turned upside down overnight. So I instantly realized, probably because I have this combined scientific and practical background, a broad education. And of course, I took the red pill years ago. Also, I guess in about 2007, I saw the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7. Then I realized the official conspiracy about 9/11, that on 9/11, 20 Muslims armed with box cutters overcame the whole USA and the laws of nature is nonsense. Then I checked the climate story, and there also you need to have 3 unwashed brains, connected brain cells, to realize that also this is a scam. Yeah, and so on and so forth. So I was, of course, prepared. I knew that if something big like this happens, this is wrong until proven otherwise. And the first thing I realized was the wrong indication to test. How did we treat the flu or the cold before 2020? Well, these are usually self-limiting diseases. So we treat ourselves, we stay at home, and after 7 days, it's over. And only in severe cases, if it gets worse, maybe after 5 days or so, we went to the GP, and then he may be diagnosed a secondary complicating bacterial pneumonia that could still be treated with antibiotics on an outpatient basis. And only if he really got sick, life-threatening sick, the GP sent us to the hospital. And only at that stage we tested for a causative virus. Because before this, it's absolutely not important whether we are suffering from influenza, corona, B19, SARS-CoV-2, or whatever, because it has no therapeutic and no prognostic consequences. So only at that stage we tested, because if there's really the risk to die, then we want to treat specifically, and then we have to know the causative virus.
Wow, that has never been so succinctly stated for me. That's fantastic. Wow.
Yes, I always was amazed. I mean, when you're talking about the nonsense PCR test, but even before this comes the wrong indication to test. And I could not understand why not every clinician realized this. I mean, now everybody who only felt a sore throat run to the hospital. Please help me, test me. Maybe I have to die, and not only to die, but to suffocate miserably. Huh? This never happened. My practice was almost empty. I saw almost no flu patients in that season because everybody with a sore throat ran to the hospital. And then, of course, some places, the emergency departments at least, were overcrowded with people suffering from a cold. Yeah. And then the next, of course, already in March, I tweeted, the test is the disease, not the virus. I mean, the proof, usually, if we wanted to test for an infection, we measured the antibody. IgM subclass for acute infections, IgG for chronic infections, because only these tests prove that the body struggled with a virus, so created antibodies. So this is a proof for infection, either acute or chronic. Huh? But here they use the PCR test. And already about 20 years ago, I didn't like these tests. When I was young, when I was an intern, the diagnosis was viral pneumonia. Huh? Usually we had no idea what was the causative germ. And then about 20 years ago, I think they started to test. So when you are hospitalized with a viral pneumonia, they do a PCR on some viruses, not of all, and usually they choose the one with the lowest CT to be the causative germ. But this can never be approved. A PCR test is no test for infection. The PCR or RT-PCR, if you want to look for RNA, these are tests for these tests. There's a test for the presence of a certain amount of a certain part of a genome of a germ. So this was also the wrong testing method. I mean, even if it was a 100% sensitive and specific test, this test alone would never prove an infection. Of course, if there is a high amount of virus, if, for example, a RT-PCR test for SARS-CoV-2 would get the result of CT17 and the one against influenza 30, then and if the symptoms are consistent and with this diagnosis, then highly likely SARS-CoV-2 would be the causative germ, but it would never be approved. And here they didn't absolutely consider the clinical conditions, the symptoms of the patients, other clinical findings. There is no single clinical, radiologic, or whatever proof of a SARS-CoV-2, of an infection with SARS-CoV-2 called COVID-19. A PCR test, even if it's a good one, is only a piece of the puzzle in the diagnostic puzzle. And then I went deeper into these PCR tests, and I found this Corman-Drosten protocol, published in the journal Eurosurveillance, I guess, about January 21st, 2020. I mean, you must say this is the worst possible RT-PCR test for SARS-CoV-2 we could possibly imagine.
How did all the people on that paper end up coming together? Like, who was the impetus between, like, hey, calling up? I mean, that list of people on there is quite, I don't know. Well, it's a motley crew of people. It's not just a bunch of guys from Switzerland. How did that author list get assembled?
You mean the Corman-Drosten?
Yeah.
Paper?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the Drosten is an important figure. You guys in the USA must realize there is not only Fauci, Drosten is much worse, because Drosten is the inventor. I mean, with Corman, Drosten, et al., but they invented this nonsense RT-PCR testing protocol. And he's also an inventor. Drosten et al. Wrote a letter to the New England Journal of Medicine. It was published on January 30th, I think, 2020. And there they propagated the myth of epidemiologically relevant asymptomatic transmission. So Drosten is really at the core of this whole scam.
Oh, no, I get that.
The wrong test protocol.
Absolutely.
Pardon?
I get that. I absolutely get that. He actually was the one who first defined also the PCR test for the original virus in 2002. I'm just curious how the opposition paper that you were on about the primer dimers and that kind of thing. How did you and Mike Eden get together on that paper? Did you know each other previously?
Yeah, I was asked by, but this was somewhat later. We published the external peer review of the Corman-Drosten protocol in November 2020. I was asked by Peter Borger from the Netherlands to join. Well, I mean, I must state, of course, I'm not a PCR guy.
No, it's okay. That's exactly what I was asking.
I know the method. I know the indication. I know what he can and what it does not can. For this, we had great PCR guys. We had Ulrike Kemmerer from Germany, and then Kevin McKernan, who became famous again recently when he was the first who discovered the contamination with plasmid DNA from the manufacturing process. Yep. So I was mainly asked as one of the earliest enlighteners to join this.
I see.
My contribution was mainly in the addendum. 2 or 3 months later, we published an addendum, and there is a clinical section, or section E, that is about the clinical aspects.
I see.
And this is mostly written by me. So this is about the wrong indication to test and the wrong test. So my contribution was in the addendum. In the external peer review paper, I just read it and found some minor errors.
No, I get it. Yep. I'm not a PCR guy. When I look back on that paper, it's remarkable to me how many people are on that paper that went on to, fight various aspects of this for a long time.
Yes, it was a gathering. It was a gathering of people who went public early, mainly, and of course some PCR cracks.
Right. Yeah. Right. Very cool.
And in the meantime, maybe if not everybody knows this, there was a slander. I mean, I published then the blogs. Of course, I could not reach out to journalists. I mean, at the start, I thought, we have to make this public. In the week or so, this prevailing corona nonsense narrative will crash. But I never got an answer when I sent email to journalists, to fellow doctors, even not to them, to politicians. I never got even an answer like, Thomas, you're crazy or so. Just no answer. This was spooky.
Interesting.
And so I intensified my activities in the social media. I wrote blogs, and on the Thursday before Easter 2020, I wrote a huge blog where I once again explained the wrong indication to test, wrong test, highly likely no epidemiological relevant asymptomatic transmission. Also, this piece, the CFR nonsense, right? They sold at that time, they told us the CFR, the case fatality rate in Switzerland is about 2%. While of course, every pupil understands that important is not the CFR, but the IFR, the infection fatality rate, that highly likely is 100 times or so lower because of the great many number of undetected cases. So already at that time, I stated this virus is not more dangerous than influenza, highly likely even less dangerous, in the range of other of his brothers and sisters coronaviruses, about 0.02%. I stated already in March 2020, and yeah, I was right. But then a good acquaintance of mine, whom I wrote, sent these emails as well, who I tried to inform. In the things I wrote, he projected threats to the government, threats to the society. I stated, for example, this virus is not so dangerous, etc. And so he called another good acquaintance of mine, actually the prime minister of the Canton Aargau. This is the province in Switzerland where I live. And on the phone, and he made 3 allegations. Allegation 1 was I was a threat for the government, for the society. I was armed, and I had a psychiatric history. And then on the phone, they decided they do not want to call me. Hey, Thomas, we do not understand what you want to explain us. Please, could we meet for a corona, and we can ask you, and you can explain it to us? No, they decided to call the chief of the state police, and he started an operation. On Saturday evening, I did some final work in my practice here in Switzerland, and I'm sitting here. So that's Saturday. It's 4 years ago on Easter Saturday. And before I wanted to go on holiday, I had some final work to do. And at about 10 o'clock in the evening, I was arrested here in my practice by an anti-terrorist unit. About 20 policemen were involved in the whole operation. 60 policemen were involved because at the same time, they projected all 5 ministers of our provincial government. And they even closed the train station that is opposite to my practice for some hours because of the well-known fundamentalist terrorist Dr. Thomas Binder. Yeah, it was ridiculous.
Now, can I interrupt here and just say that in America, it feels like this would be easy to do because America is so fractured and the cities are so big. But I did a postdoc in Lausanne, and I have the feeling just the size of the communities in Switzerland and the language, the way the language works there and how everybody is so tightly knit. How could they get away with this? You must have had a reputation of not being crazy, right? You had lived there your whole life. I mean, how could this not have huge ramifications for the truth? Or did it? I mean,
maybe I have to continue just a little bit.
Okay, yes, sorry.
After an hour, they realized all these 3 allegations were wrong. I had no gun at home. I had a gun at home, but this was stored at home. This was the gun I got in 1980 when I entered the Swiss military service, and when I left military about 15 years ago, as a prime lieutenant at that time, I stored the weapon at home without ammunition. This is legal and absolutely normal in Switzerland, but I didn't carry a gun on me. And I had no psychiatric history, and they could not show me any single threat in all I had written. There are 100 pages or 200 pages, Twitter, and all this stuff all I wrote. Yeah, but then they did not send me home, did not apologize. They realized, oh my God, false alarm, 60 policemen, this will go public. Because I sent a message when I realized the police is there. and I sent a message in Twitter. The police is arresting me, is coming after me, and this created some huge interest. So it created quite huge interest, and so probably they have to think, oh, how could we get out there? And they sent a fellow doctor to me, an emergency doctor, and she had to check whether I was able to be arrested, physically able. Because although they could not even issue an arrest warrant, they could not put me in prison because I did nothing unlawful. After now, they had realized that I did nothing unlawful. And she decided I was corona insane. But I mean, you must imagine at that time she wore such a FFP hardcore mask, and when I entered her room, she shouted out, "Put on the mask, the virus, the virus." So this fellow doctor had to check my mental status. In a normal world, I would have had to check her mental status. I mean, I did such examinations for involuntary commitment myself, maybe 100 times in my life or so. Yeah, but the first question was, what is the date? I answered April 11th, 2020. And maybe the first question or so, what is the current year? Well, this was not very intelligent, of course, but it was a kind of silent protest. Then I answered 1984, and it went on like this. Yeah, really, that's no joke.
I believe it. It's fantastic.
Like this, and she decided, yes, I am corona insane. So she invented the new diagnosis, corona insanity. And to be insane, if we are insane, we can still be kind people. Huh? For involuntary commitment, we must also endangering others or be self-endangering. So as I was not endangering others, she said I was self-endangering, although 2 days or so before, I tweeted something like, I'm 58 years old, sporty, and no medication, and would never ever commit suicide. Because I realized, of course, this was very spooky, and that I could go some risk if I go public. That there could be some risk if I go public. Yeah, then they put me into close psychiatry for 6 days, the 36 hours in a padded cell. There, a psychiatrist diagnosed mania. I appealed in court, and I was released, but because I had mania, they said, yeah, well, you're a doctor, you want to work, you stay in a psychiatric hospital for 6 weeks to have treated your mania, or you may leave, but you must eat Abilify, a neuroleptic, and whether you take it or not is checked every week by a blood level check. So, of course, I chose the second decision. After I left, I restarted to work. They could never really do me harm because I never did anything unlawful. And I never said something that was not 100% scientifically evidence-based, at least not evidence-based in the currently accepted scientific belief system.
So number two was go home and take medicine, or I didn't understand. Yes?
Yeah, I did this. Yeah, of course. I mean, I took 2 tablets of Abilify the day before they did the blood check. I looked up the half-life and so this. And after 3 weeks, I checked my liver enzymes, and happily, my liver enzymes went up about 3 times, so I could stop it. And at the same time, I could release me from this state psychiatry, change to a private psychiatrist, because of course also the health authorities, they wanted a psychiatric report every about 6 weeks by a psychiatrist that I'm eventually able to see and treat patients. Yeah. I mean, my case shows nicely what's going on. Obviously, the society is divided like we had never seen before. And this never happens by accident. This means that a huge part of society is living in a context of delusion, in a cult or in a sect. And of course, everybody says, I'm the realist, you are living in a cult. So in this situation, we must always question ourselves, and I did this, of course, 100 times before I went public. Am I absolutely sure that I'm the realist and not the deluded? And to answer, we can only answer these questions, am I the realist or the deluded, by looking at the reality as soberly as possible. And this is what I did. I informed the public about the reality from my view on the reality, so that the public could decide who is right and who is wrong, or at least who is closer to the reality and who not. I mean, this is what was amazing, what everybody should have realized also. I mean, we had never, well, okay, in the climate scam, it is about the same. Huh? We had never any public scientific debate. Huh? And then usually, I mean, for example, especially the public broadcasters are the problems. That some yellow press is lying, the people can understand, but especially here in Europe, in almost every country, there are public broadcasters that are paid by us. We are obliged to pay them. In Switzerland, for example, 1 Swiss franc per day, so that they are independent, huh? And they have the duty, this is even written in the law, to inform us objectively as possible. And they never presented our view on this alleged pandemic. Never, ever. And there was never a scientific debate. Or if we asked the other side, nobody, not a single one was ever ready for a public scientific debate. Huh? Strange as well. I mean, if you are sure to be right, why not engage in such a public debate? You can crush the other side, huh? If you are right. If you are wrong, maybe you risk to be destroyed. But yeah. Then, of course, I realized, you cannot fight alone. I networked. Maybe I have to state as well. Before I went public, I mean, I was sure I was right, but I could not be only 99% sure as a doctor when I went public, because if I was wrong and the tsunami had arrived, I would have been destroyed as a doctor. Huh? And at that time, I was looking for other doctors who did the same, and I found Suchari Bhakti. I found his YouTube video, with his speech to the Chancellor Merkel of Germany. And he also, Suchari, at that time, he was rather naive. It's not, I don't want to be unkind, but he states it as well. Of course, he thought, I have to spread this information, and Chancellor Merkel will understand it, huh? And in a week, this nonsense will be over. So we all were somewhat naive, some a little bit more, some a little bit less. For example, Mike Eden always states, I was a normie until 2020. Mm-hmm. So he didn't take the red pill before it. So of course, if you didn't take the red pill before, it usually takes longer to accept. I mean, in the end, we have to accept that obviously our own government, even the Swiss government, here in Heidi Land, that even the Swiss government is waging war against its own populace. This is hard to believe and even harder to swallow. Yeah. But and I realized, of course, that there is, for example, stage terrorism, etc. But this never happened in Switzerland. I mean, the Swiss government also colludes in the CO2 scam, but there was never ever stage terrorism in Switzerland. So I always thought, the Swiss government, they have some limits. They won't do everything. But in this COVID pandemic, they followed the orders of the powers that be. As in every other country.
A lot of those powers that be are actually in your country, which kind of, I mean, how does that feel?
That is exactly what I wanted to state now.
Okay.
Switzerland is actually at the core of evil. I mean, all these evil organizations are located in Switzerland, and they are all granted immunity by our criminal government. So, I mean, just think about this. Why should an organization have immunity? An organization like the WHO, the World Economic Forum, Gavi, etc. Why should they have immunity if they were not criminal? Why should a person that is not criminal or an organization that is not criminal want to have immunity? Yeah.
That's No, go ahead. No. I was writing something down.
I realized I cannot fight alone. I networked here in Switzerland. I joined a network of doctors and scientists of our site. I was a member of the board for some time there. It's called Aletheia, after the Greek goddess of truth. I joined Doctors for COVID Ethics. And we already mentioned, was a part of this external peer review of the German, of the Corman-Drosten review report. I also joined the German network of doctors and scientists. And a great friend of mine is now, of course, Sucharit Bhakti. Actually, we had the same teacher. This is quite interesting. Sucharit is about 15 or so years older than me. He studied in Bonn. And at that time, his teacher in internal medicine was the Swiss professor Walter Siegenthaler. And this was absolutely the crack of differential diagnosis. This is his book in German. He wrote this book. He was in Europe, especially in German-speaking countries, but in the whole Europe, he was the crack in differential diagnosis in internal medicine. And I actually had, 15 years later, the same professor. I studied in Zurich, and this Dr. Siegenthaler, Professor Siegenthaler, the Swiss professor, that came back to Zurich, because this is even a larger university than Bonn. And there also I studied, and Sucharit was his, was one of his assistants I liked, and I was later in Zurich. This was quite interesting. Mm-hmm. He asked Sucharit whether he would join him into Switzerland, but Sucharit at that time decided to go into research. He became a microbiologist, and he asked me also to stay there, but I decided to specialize in cardiology. But this is an interesting coincidence. And this is especially what was dying out at the time. Differential diagnosis. There was no longer any differential diagnosis of acute respiratory infections. It was just COVID. Everything was COVID, especially acute respiratory infections. But then, of course, all other diagnoses were mislabeled as COVID by these nonsense RT-PCR tests, because if you have one virus, if you run it at CT 35 to 45, that was done. And there were studies that above 25 or 26 or so, they could not cultivate virus. So above 25, 26 or so, that there is no even cultivable virus around. So there cannot be an infection at that CT, in that CT range. An infection, they have maybe 15 to 20 or so CT.
Have you considered the possibility that with bad, let's say, over general targeting of certain motifs, or certain epitopes, whatever amplicon they choose, if they didn't choose an amplicon that was specific enough, they could be confounding a background signal that was always there with spread of something new.
Exactly. This was the weak point. As I stated, there might be a good PCR test with almost 100% specificity, but in Germany, there was a laboratory survey already in summer 2020, and there the specificity of the Corman-Drosten RT-PCR test was 98.6%. But the specificity went down, exactly as you said, in the presence of other coronaviruses. It went down to 92.4%. So, of course, during the summer, and this also, even I tweeted it again yesterday or 2 days ago, even nowadays, even people who call themselves experts do not realize what a specificity, for example, of 99% means. What is the meaning of this? That the meaning of the specificity is highly dependent on the prevalence of the virus. So if the prevalence of the virus is 0 or close to 0, all positive RT-PCR tests, or almost all, are a false positive. I explain it to lay people like this. If you do an RT-PCR test in 10,000 males, that is 99% specific, we get 100 positive tests. And because the pregnancy of prevalence in men is 0, like the prevalence of coronaviruses, beta corona common cold viruses in the summer is 0 or close to 0. All those 100 tests, 100% of the positive tests are false positives. So we saw this. May I share my screen for a moment?
I have to set it, but yes, you definitely can. Let me just give a click here.
Because there is really,
Go ahead.
there is something, yeah. Maybe, yeah, I think in Twitter. Oh, JJ, look, our correspondent. Yeah, I think it's there. Yeah. There, I like this because a picture paints 1,000 words. Because if you only look at this graph, you understand that it was mainly, at least, an RT-PCR testing pandemic. This is actually the ICU bed monitoring in Switzerland. It was done by the ETH, one of the most famous universities in Switzerland, even all over the world, especially famous also in the climate scam. There you see the ICU bed occupancy and you see the dates. And there is a black curve that is the total ICU bed occupancy. So around here, between about 600 and 900. We always had a hump in the winter in the ICUs, because these are, of course, the acute respiratory infections whose worst cases must be ventilated mechanically in the intensive care units. So we always had to have spare beds of about 20% to manage this hump we have in the winter. And then you see a green curve. These are the non-COVID patients. And the orange curve, these are the COVID patients. And now look what happens there. For example, in the summer 2020, we had this false positivity rate of about 1%. About 1% of all tests were false positives, corresponding to the about 99% specificity, like I explained before. And then suddenly here, it was in October, COVID patients arrive in the ICU. This curve goes up very steeply. And then what would you expect? So, of course, if COVID patients arrive, the number of myocardial infarctions, strokes, victims of severe car accidents, etc., so the green line, will continue straight like this. And maybe at some time it would go down a little bit, because if you postpone, for example, operations because you have no more ICU capacity. But we see also this curve here, the dotted line, these are the total ICU beds. They increased it at the start to 1,500 beds, and during the alleged pandemic of the century, they decreased it. And you see there the difference between these two curves, the dotted line and the black curve. Well, from this, you see there has never been any overcrowding of the ICUs in Switzerland, of course. There has always been local overcrowding of an ICU. Of course, if we have suddenly 10 patients that must be ventilated due to bacterial pneumonia, or if there is a car accident with 10 severely injured, then of course a local ICU is overcrowded. But already as a resident, I sometimes had to call for an hour to find an ICU bed for a patient. This has always been like this. But you see that at the very same moment that the orange curve goes down, the green curve goes up, the green curve goes down, and vice versa. These two curves are almost complete mirror images, and the total number of ICU beds, a part of this hump, of these humps, is not unchanged. So how can you possibly explain this? So is there, if a new patient arrives in the ICU, a supernatural instance, probably highly, most would call it God, decides to postpone a myocardial infarction, pulmonary embolism, a car accident? Or is the solution not that simple, that everybody who enters the hospital is tested with this nonsense RT-PCR test? I always state rolling a dice is cheaper and less invasive. And then if you are in the hospital because of a myocardial infarction, after one day the test result comes in, positive, zack, you switch in the orange curve. I mean, this alone is 100% proof that this was mainly an RT-PCR testing pandemic. I stated this since since October, when I saw this at that stage already, I stated this. Look at this. This alone is the proof. So, but at least nobody ever dared to contradict me. I never was attacked.
I want to ask.
Of course, over time, it became ever more obvious. I mean, look at this. Huh?
I want to ask.
Sorry.
I want to ask a big question here, because I just a hypothetical. You as a doctor, if at this stage in the pandemic, I don't know if you can see my arrow or not, but at this stage in the pandemic, where you're saying that all these COVID patients show up, but then the actual number of adults that are non-COVID in the ICU plummets, and that's sort of mirror image all the way around here. Can you imagine what would happen if all of these people who came into a hospital diagnosed for COVID were measured in their with a pulse oximeter and given supplementary oxygen? Would that do good for most of those patients, or would that be a dangerous thing to do for anybody that comes in and tests positive, give them oxygen?
Yes, of course. I mean, oxygen is toxic, but in higher amounts, of course. If you are not intubated, you may not inhale that much oxygen.
Because we found people in America that were brought in, and because there was a shortage of ventilators or whatever excuse they gave them like 10 liters of oxygen a minute through these nasal things, and then it was that these people seem to have dried out, and then now we need to put you on a ventilator because it's so painful.
Yes, and I heard that below, if the saturation went below 90, they just as a reflex intubated them. I mean, this again is this belief in figures. You have to watch the patient. How is the patient? Maybe 85 or even lower is bearable for quite a long time, or even lower. I mean, you cannot just treat the patients according to a figure. But maybe one thing I have to state.
Okay.
I mean, in the ICUs, of course, not everybody on this orange curve had the diagnosis COVID. The problem is there was direct reporting, and highly likely in every country, of the positive PCR test results to the authorities. So the laboratories sent all positive test results to the authorities, and then they sent the results to the legacy media, and they published these case numbers. The physicians, the treating physicians, were not asked in this: are these patients really suffering from COVID? So this was always a huge mistake. Of course, the doctor must decide what is the diagnosis, and then he must inform the health authorities about the diagnosis. But they bypass this by the laboratory sending the testing results directly to the authorities. So not everybody working in the ICU was a criminal. I think they realized that they have not that many patients, but suffering from COVID, but obviously nobody looked at this curve. At this graph, I don't know. It's hard to say, but as you say, I'm sure there were people killed in the hospitals. Mm-hmm. There was mistreatment. There was also too late diagnosis. I mean, many say, but we saw so many people with white lungs. Well, I answer, we always had some patients with white lungs, always. But maybe one or two. Now they maybe had 10 or 20. But could the explanation not simply be what I stated before? The patients who got worse, who got bacterial pneumonia, they didn't go to the GP. They were told, stay at home. You have COVID. We cannot help you. Go to the hospital when you are really, really close to the end of life, when you have blue lips. So maybe only at that time, maybe after 10, 14 or even more days, severe bacterial pneumonia was diagnosed too late, maybe already with SIRS, with multi-organ failure and all that. So I'm quite sure that many of the alleged severe COVID patients had pulmonary bacterial pneumonia, or fungal
I mean, in America,
fungal infections
Dr.
that
Binder,
were not treated or treated too late. Sorry, Jay.
No,
Yeah.
Dr. Binder, in America, they said it for years on television. There are still people saying it on social media now that viral pneumonia can't be treated with antibiotics. And so these doctors have been led to believe that if the PCR dings positive, then it's a viral pneumonia, which can't respond to antibiotics. And so the whole possibility is actually off the table, which is an extraordinary. It's almost like, how can you be so incompetent as a professional to not see that shell game? I mean, but they did.
This is what I stated before. It was always our duty in cases that got worse to try to differentiate as good as possible. For example, CPR is one factor. If the CPR is CPR,
PCR, yeah, it's okay.
Oh my God, PCR. Oh, if PCR is 50, 60 or so, probably it's a viral infection. But if it's 200, 300, 400, the likelihood for a bacterial infection is always great. So it was always our duty to differentiate viral from bacterial infection, because as your viral infections we cannot treat only supportively. There are some antivirals, but this was also always amazing. They never worked really. Antibiotics work. They work really good. You can cultivate bacteria on an agar plate. You can put some antibiotics on it, and you see how the bacteria are killed. This we cannot see, of course, with viruses. And all these antivirus, they do not really work. They work only in the first days. This also, I mean, they applied them after 10, 14 days or so, when there is usually no more viral replication, so that they cannot, at that stage, they cannot work. But they gave remdesivir, highly toxic remdesivir, that could not work at that stage at all, and detoxified people. Yeah, this differential diagnosis mainly between viral and bacterial infection. Do we have to choose antibiotics or not? This usually did no longer happen. This did not happen. But it's also interesting was in the first protocols, often there was included erythromycin. Erythromycin is a good antibiotic against community-acquired pneumonia. It was, for some years, it was the first-line drug in Switzerland against community-acquired pneumonia, because it covers also mycoplasms, for example. Nowadays, it's amoxicillin plus clavulanic acid. But I was also amazed that these included antibiotics, and they were said to work. So maybe on many patients they worked because they included an antibiotic. And Bernie Rancourt told me that in the States, in some regions, the antibiotic prescriptions at that time plummeted by 50%.
Oh yeah, some places
even another proof.
Yeah.
So why should there be less bacterial pneumonia than before? Highly likely there were even more, because they were diagnosed too late.
Exactly.
So the opposite should have happened. The antibiotic prescriptions should have increased. This is another proof for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, well done. Yeah,
I mean, what was also obvious very early was that there were. I mean, I always stated during these times of total deceit, we have to check the only hard data, and hard data is mortality. So why was there excess mortality in spring 2020 in some countries, and a very unusual shape, huge short spikes, while in neighboring countries, there was no. Does the virus have a passport and this may not enter? I mean, even if there is a wall between for example, in Canada there was no excess mortality in spring 2020. In the USA there was, although there is an 8,000 or so kilometer border between those two countries. I mean, this alone also proves that the killer that the virus may not be the killer, but the killer is our paradoxical reaction to the virus.
I mean, in New York City,
inaccurate.
In New York City, we're
supposed
to believe in New York City that in 4 weeks, almost 25,000 people died. That's an extraordinary pile of bodies. And we have no evidence for it. We don't have names. We don't have graves. It's extraordinary because that story was the inclined plane that they used to project what was going to happen in the future if we didn't absolutely lock down. And I think that New York City is one of these stories that was told around the world as a warning, not much different than blowing up 2 buildings and saying everybody's got to take their shoes off when they get on airplanes now because terrorism in New York. I think New York City is almost the people that have lived there long term have really been victimized by these repeated exercises.
Yes, I think in New York was the Bergamo of the United States. We in Europe had Bergamo. Even nowadays, if I explain all that stuff for an hour or so, what is the answer? Hey, but what is with Bergamo? Look at Bergamo. What happened in Bergamo? Well, in Bergamo, they showed videos of military lorries that transported bodies to the crematories. This is correct in English?
Yep.
Crematory. How did this happen? Yeah, well, the Italian government, in Italy, most people are Catholic. And these Catholics do not want to be cremated. And so they do not have as many crematories as we have in Switzerland or probably you in the States or so. So the majority was not cremated. So they had a shortage of crematories. So they put all these coffins in a gym hall, in a huge gym hall. Maybe, and of course there were some 100 coffins or so. Then they filmed all this, and they transported it in crematories far away. And they did not use lorries or whatever. They chose military lorries, so that they could make the people believe, my God, there is such a crisis that even the civil authorities cannot imagine it. The military must be mobilized to do this. This is most of the story of Bergamo.
Wow.
In Bergamo also found something else. In January 2020, they vaccinated 36,000 elderly, frail people against meningococci. You can Google this. It's in Italy. You found it. There are articles. And I mean, they did this at the time when there was influenza around, where SARS-CoV-2 was around, and maybe it was not a good idea at the time if you want to have a flu shot and you have a cold, the GP sends you home and says, come back in a week. It's not a good idea to vaccinate people who are already infected. So this might, and the meningococcal, the vaccine against meningococci, is rather a dangerous vaccine anyway. So maybe this could also have played a role. I don't know.
Wow.
But I mean, what I would do, I would examine, did more people die in Bergamo who were vaccinated than were unvaccinated, for example, against meningococci. There were some hotspots where I'm not absolutely sure what happened. It is also possible that in some hotspots they released some pathogen. Maybe even they turned on 5G and another specification or so. I don't know. EM radiation is, of course, unhealthy. And I mean, what was interesting, I was never attacked as strongly as when I mentioned already in April 2020 that there was a huge correlation between severe COVID cases and 5G density. But this correlation, of course, must not be causation, but it may be a hint for possible causation. There was a Spanish study in Barcelona who actually showed this correlation as well. But of course, the cause could be that of course, this 5G expansion is also part of the agenda. They need the broader bandwidth to install this whole control and surveillance and control agenda. So this may be, of course, correlation without just be a coincidence. But yeah, I don't know what happened in some hotspots, maybe, but
well, I keep
for example,
encouraging.
in Switzerland also in spring 2020 we had no excess mortality in Switzerland. In Germany they didn't have. Switzerland is at the border to Italy. Yeah, it's.
I keep encouraging people to not try to explain what happened with one story, because if they were doing this on purpose, then they would have used lots of different means and told us it was all the same thing, and it would have made it even harder to figure out. A poignant question that we didn't get to yet. At what stage in your because I tell the story on my stream that I feel like one of the big tricks of the pandemic was to fool all of us into arguing about whether this was a natural virus or a lab leak, so that we would all accept the idea that something very dangerous is possible and it could come again. And I think this was a ruse. I don't think we should have ever argued about where it came from. And that whole argument wasted years and so much of our energy and time. And now we have children running around thinking that laboratory viruses are especially dangerous. And I think that's a horrible myth to perpetuate. When did that come to Switzerland, and what's the state of that debate now there?
Yes, it came immediately to Switzerland as well when it came and when it was the debate in the USA. I fully agree with you, of course, Jay. I fully agree with you. I mean, obviously, and proven again by Denis Rancourt, obviously there was no pandemic of a killer virus. And also this I stated early. If you want to understand your enemy, go in his shoes. Huh? If I was a psychopath who had the duty to plan such a pandemic of a killer virus, if I was not suicidal, I would certainly not release a killer virus that could hurt or even kill me as well. It is that simple. Huh? I would choose a comparatively harmless or even no virus. I must say, I'm not sure whether it was an RT-PCR testing pandemic by 95, 99, or even 100%. I'm open to this. I always stick to 100% evidence, and for the moment, the evidence for me is not enough to decide. That is why I say the majority was an RT-PCR testing pandemic, but I'm not completely sure whether there was a disease called COVID, produced by a virus called SARS-CoV-2. I'm not 100% sure yet. But
I can tell you, I can give you an interesting option to add to this idea. Think about the possibility that we know for sure, 100% sure, that if they made the DNA fragment that they knew the PCR test was specific for, they could put that DNA fragment anywhere. They could put it in sewers, and then they could test for it, and they could definitely find it. And we know we can make DNA. And we know that PCR, when the DNA that the PCR primers are specific for is present, it will amplify it. So the whole signal that we're told they found could have been put there and found using the very techniques that they claim find a random pathogen going around the world. And I think a lot of people are unaware of how easily that actual molecular illusion could be created. I mean, it's not crazy technology. It's very straightforward molecular biology. If we took the spike protein DNA and spilled it on the floor in your office, it would sit there for months, if not years, and be detectable by a PCR test years later, depending on how well you cleaned your floor. I mean, that's how durable DNA would be in that context. There's even
even if there was no virus, with the PCR test alone, you can create 100% of all cases.
That's right.
If you, in the summer, 98% specificity, 1.6% false positives. But then, as I mentioned before, 100% of all these 1.6% positives are false positives. And this goes up in the corona season that corresponds with the flu season in our northern hemisphere from November to April. It went down to 92.4, so 7.6% false positives. So this alone, even if there was absolutely no virus, if this test tested for nothing at all, we got this seasonal curve with high case numbers in the flu season, in the corona season, and lower case numbers in the summer. This was also something I realized early. I mean, what were the alleged risk factors to die from COVID? It were mainly the risk factors to die. And what was the average age of the people who deceased from COVID? It was the risk factor of all people who it is the median age of the people to die. So this is also another hint. I mean, for example, in influenza, of course, influenza is more dangerous with age as well, but it is also dangerous for the small children. The curve goes like this: small children, it goes down, and then the elderly it goes up. But there it went just like this. It was not more dangerous for the young people, for the babies. Yeah. As I said, this picture paints 1,000 words, and this understands any scientist and even every lay person. I mean, anybody shall give me an explanation for this mirror image of the two curves. Nobody could ever do it.
Okay, so now it makes sense to me that Switzerland must already have pulled their head out and everybody realizes that you're right? Or are you guys still absolutely...
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's the same in Switzerland as well as in the US. Of course, we cannot get into the legacy media. We here in new media, we're here in other new media. This evening, after this, actually, there will be a discussion about the RKI files. This is an important message. I think that many Americans have not yet heard of this. RKI, the Robert Koch Institute, is the German equivalent of the CDC. And there, a group of journalists around Paul Schreier, he's also in Twitter, they sued, they made an FOI request. And they struggled 2 years in court to get the documents of the task force who was responsible, mainly the RKI, this Robert Koch Institute, who led the government and the people through this alleged crisis of the century. And what they found was amazing. What is published now here is amazing, and it even enters legacy media in Germany. It starts to enter the legacy media. So I think this is really important. There is a tweet, my last tweet is pinned up in English. It's very important that this information spreads also, because it was the same, of course, in each and every country. For example, in spring, that the RKI found, that this is not a especially dangerous virus. And then there is written that person that is redacted, this FOI, this release, these are more than 1,000 pages, but they are still heavily redacted. And then a person from the outside decided we have to upgrade the dangerousness of the virus. We have to upgrade it. Yeah. This is just another example. There in June, the case numbers, even those fake case numbers went down, because in June there is no coronavirus around. So in June, even in June, they sold us, and I guess to you in the States as well, they sold us. They still stated it's highly dangerous. There is a highly dangerous virus around. It's still high risk. They made the people believe, they gaslighted the people into believing that even in the summer, they have to wear masks at 40 degrees Celsius. And when there is no coronavirus, when there is only these 1% false positive tests.
In October.
There is written in these files, but they decided not to downgrade the level of dangerousness, and that this was prescribed by the federal Ministry of Health, the German Federal Ministry of Health. There you see exactly how the politicians told the scientists, the health authorities, what to do and what to release. For example, there is written, that the case numbers go down. We cannot write. So person XY, redacted, has the duty to find another formulation for this, that the case numbers go down. This is amazing. And I think this, at least in Germany, it gets traction in the legacy media. And I think it's important that we also inform the people in the English-speaking countries and all over the world about this.
Absolutely. And the flip side of that, or the mirror of that in America, and I think it was October or November of 2020, Rochelle Walensky and a couple other people went on TV with a Zoom with like 3 windows in it. And they told us that for the unvaccinated, we could look forward to a winter of severe disease and death. They actually said those words. For the unvaccinated, you can expect a winter of severe disease and death. That's spectacular. They pulled.
Let's turn on the light here.
Oh yeah, it's okay. They pulled no punches.
It's getting dark
with
here.
What they said, and they pulled absolutely no punches at all. So do you have a sort of closing thing? Like, what are your plans? What are you doing? How are you? I mean, have you kind of resigned to wait until people wake up? I mean, are we still fighting? What do we do now? I don't know, other than I'm trying to think of ways to teach the biology and spend time with people that want to learn it. Stuff that I was teaching already a few years ago, I'm starting to teach again. But I still feel like an awful lot of people are running around convincing us that this is something that happened and that it's going to happen again. And so we need to elect the right people and enact the right laws. And I'm having the feeling that none of these things are the right thing to do. So I don't know how to encourage people other than one person at a time to try and like pull people out of this. But where are you at with that? What's your plans going forward? What are you doing now?
I'm somewhat tired after 4 years, of course, gathering always the same again and again. And I try to explain it as shortly as possible. For example, years ago, I tweeted, the test is the pest and all this stuff like this. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the people have to realize 2 basic things first. It was an RT-PCR testing pandemic, or mainly it was. Because, and I also tell the people, I guess you know this, but look, if you do not believe me, read the New York Times article under the title, Faith in Quick Test Leads to Epidemic That Wasn't. It was published in 2007. Faith in Quick Test Leads to Epidemic That Wasn't. There they describe an alleged whooping cough pandemic in New Hampshire in 2006. Where they tested 142 people positive for pertussis with a PCR test. Oh. And then in the bacterial culture, none of them, not a single one was positive in the bacterial culture. Right. So this was a 100% PCR testing epidemic. But this is exactly what they did here. And I mean, people who say, conspiracy theories, this appeared in the New York Times, New York Times. In 2007, I really can recommend it.
Pamela,
didn't you know it?
No, I did not know it. And one of my viewers already had the link in the chat before I could find it. I just found it now. That's really extraordinary.
It's really extraordinary. And there are quotes. They quote infectiologists and epidemiologists. And for example, one quote was something like this. That the most amazing for him was that he said, that everything we did was so sensible at the time, appeared to be so sensible at the time. That everything is written there, everything that the people who are living in this belief system, if you are in the belief system, obviously it looks somewhat consistent. I have problems to believe it, but for them, it looks somewhat consistent, and they believe it, like the climate scientists who are living in this climate scan, of course. They live in the belief system. If you are taught in this context of delusion, you cannot see, or if you are part of the system, you cannot see it. You must also always take the outside perspective. This, for example, is important that we Westerners must, of course, watch Russia Today, for example, to become an outside perspective on us. And I mean, there is the US Empire. It was first the British Empire, then it became the US Empire. And honestly, I mean, the currently ruling empire is always the most evil party, because if not, it would not be the empire. Huh? And also this, we Westerners must realize, hey, we were not always the good guys, or rather the contrary. Huh? It is not these alleged Muslims who blew the World Trade Centers up in the air. It's rather us, the problem. And these are such insights. Really, they hurt. They hurt, of course. It hurts, and when you have these insights, you touch rock bottom. But after sometimes you advance. We have to overcome ideology. Let's try to forget ideology. Just look at the reality as soberly as possible, whether we like the result or not, whether we dislike it. And I think you and me, we are curious by nature. We became scientists. We are interested in the reality. But even if we don't like it, we must accept it is the reality. And I always use the allegory of Plato's cave. I think this is really good. Most people are living in Plato's cave, and they on the walls is no longer the shadow of the science projected on the walls, but there is a huge flat screen. The legacy media project different virtual realities on this flat screen. 9/11 reality, the CO2 reality, the Ukraine reality, the pandemic reality, virtual realities. And the people are sitting there and they believe it. And it is our duty, once we have realized there is an exit that leads to the sunlight, that we have to go back in this cave, whether we like it or not, and try to explain those people, hey guys, there is an exit. Outside there is the sun. And 98% of the people outside are good, great people, nice people. It's only these 2% psychopaths, or I prefer to call them malignant severe narcissists. Then you have not the debate, are they sociopaths, psychopaths, whatever. They are evil people without conscience, without empathy, without remorse. Those are the guys who always ruled the empathetic humanity. They were wearing crowns in ancient times. Nowadays they have billions in their pockets, and there is even the multi-trillionaire level above them that is not even known publicly. I mean, who is the richest guy? Currently, I guess it's Elon Musk. No. What is with the Rothschilds and the Rockefeller family? Huh? They were the richest families for centuries, and they suddenly disappeared. Did they suddenly impoverish? No, these are, of course, there is a multi-billionaire level, and these are on the multi-trillionaire level, and the multi-billionaires are their front men. For example, Elon Musk is the front man for the whole technical aspect of Agenda 2030, or Great Resets, or One Health, that is basically all the same. And Gates is the front man for the pandemic myths, and they play a certain role. These are the front men. These are the leading personnel of the ruling trillionaire psychopath class. And we have to try. But well, sometimes I become quite desperate. But there is also hope. For example, in Switzerland, we could vote 3 times. That there was a referendum about the COVID law. Right? The COVID law gave the executive branch these powers, this executive power in an authoritarian regime. The parliament was silenced. They took them out themselves by running away and putting on masks and telling it's too dangerous when we meet and so on. But this happened also in every country. Now I lost. I'm blathering a little bit.
No, not at all.
What did I want to say? What did I try to say?
You were telling a story, but you just started it.
We had three referendums. And although the majority voted for the COVID law, so for these insane measures, by about 64%, the youngest people, between 18 and 35, they rejected the COVID law by 56 or so %. This gives me hope.
Yes.
And we old guys, huh? I'm a dinosaur almost. Huh? Sometimes we say, "Oh, the young people, it's not the same as it was when." No, this is one hope of the young people, because it's clear the young people, they inform themselves in other sources in the internet. They do not longer be bombarded by news. They are not interested. If they are interested, they do an active search to get around the answers they want to have. And another hope is that although everybody was propagating these jabs that of course are unnecessary, negative, effective, and life-threatening, but I think everybody who is listening here knows this, so we have not to repeat it. But almost nobody takes these jabs now. In Switzerland, the vaccination rate now is close to zero. And I think even in the USA, where the CDC still recommends jabs to even to children and even to pregnant women. I mean, to recommend this to pregnant women, this was the worst crime in this insanity, in this genocide. But this means that the people still realize, even if they do not agree, and so still they do not no longer take the last step. I think they have realized it. And there the important things are, first, it was a testing pandemic. This is the recipe for the WHO to fabricate any testing pandemic against any disease X at will, according to the same recipe with a nonsense PCR or RT-PCR test. And this, of course, is important now that WHO wants to have global power that is above the constitution of every country with the new international health regulations and the pandemic agreement. And the second important message is that it is not mainly the spike and the lipid nanoparticles that makes the toxicity of this mRNA vaccine platform. Of course, those two are toxic as well, but it is mainly the basic sin that every medical student learns in immunology in the first lecture, maybe in the second. What is the basic duty of our immune system? It is to recognize non-self. So this was the basic sin. If we do a gene therapy, for example, for people that, I don't know, do not produce enough insulin or so, then this is a protein of our own body. This may work. But if we inject the construction plan for a protein foreign to the body, and this enters any body cell, even transverses the blood-brain barrier and the placental barrier, and there it produces a foreign protein. The cells express and then present the foreign body protein and fragments of it on their surface. They are recognized as non-selves. The white blood cells are policing around. They see these cells carrying a foreign protein. They think this is an alien. We attack it. And I think this is also clear, because what if the lipid nanoparticles made the main toxicity? I think with every shot, the toxicity would rise more or less linearly. If it was the spike, the toxicity should even go down with every shot, because there are more and more neutralizing antibodies. But if it is this autoimmune attack, of course, the immune system is trained ever more by every shot. So the dangerousness of this platform increases exponentially with every shot. This was also shown by Denis Rancourt. The dangerousness increases exponentially with age, about twice every 5 years, and with every dose. And we made this case in the book that was made, that we wrote. Mainly Michael Palmer wrote it. You know it, DNA, mRNA toxicity. You can download it for free from our website, doctorsforcovidethics.org. I think there we also presented what Arne Burkhardt found, the first pathologist to examine the jab victims and all this. So the people must realize that the problem is not only these COVID vaccines, but that the whole modified RNA vaccine platform must be forbidden, must be banned because this basic toxicity will be the same whether we produce a foreign antigen that is part of influenza, of SARS-CoV-2, corona, whatever. This basic toxicity is to expect from a whole platform. So do never ever accept not all COVID vaccines, but not other mRNA or DNA vaccines.
There's a really
Ever.
There's a really good story that goes along with this, that a mirror of what you said with regard to self and non-self. Somebody who has low amounts of insulin is still producing insulin, so it's still a protein that is a self protein. The original example of this technology rolled out with adenovirus is this guy Jesse Gelsinger in the early 2000s. He was missing a protein, an enzyme in his liver, and so it was not a self protein. They put that enzyme back in his liver, and for about 3 weeks he was fine until the autoimmune response hit, and then has had catastrophic liver failure and died. And so it is exactly the same thing here. It doesn't matter what protein you choose. I've been saying it for a while too. I'm really happy that you zeroed in on that, because the circular DNA that's been found in the shots is an added toxicity and an added danger that doesn't in any way preclude the already dumb idea of transfecting people. So I'm really happy that you mentioned that.
How can you explain me? How did scientists, not all scientists like you, not all doctors like me, not immediately realize this? I mean, I stated this before. They took the criminal emergency use authorization. When I first heard about this new platform, I looked at the lipid nanoparticles. I was interested in how can it stay in the muscle?
Exactly.
How can it only transfect the muscle? So I was looking for a receptor of these lipid nanoparticles that makes them only enter the skeletal muscle cells. And in December 2020, I had to state that there is none. So these lipid nanoparticles are deliberately chosen to enter any body cell, even the brain and the embryonic cells. This is absolute proof of intention to harm. I mean, there are many stupid guys around, of course, but some people in some key positions must have known exactly what they do. I mean, not everybody who was involved in the production of this, the research, and then in the production, can be so dumb. I mean, yeah.
Oh, you said it. Yeah, I'm so happy you said it. I mean, I almost want to end it there, because that's really how I feel. This was criminally negligent. There were people who knew. They knew because they've been using it. They've been rolling it out on cancer patients. They've been using it in very strict contexts, and they've always known. We've been using it. This is my argument. We've been using it in mice for years and years and years, and all of those mice need to be sacrificed, because if you let the transfection go, the immune response is devastating. We always knew that. And it was shocking to me when I talked to my colleagues and they just didn't understand that we were about to transfect our grandparents and then our children. I'm going to let you go, because I know you have another show coming up and you probably need a break, and I've already taken an hour and a half.
I have maybe 5 or 10 minutes. There is just one thing.
Yes, please, go ahead, of course.
But also every layperson can understand. Right? As I said, we inject the construction plan for the production of a protein foreign to the body. This is a prodrug. Huh? Without having any control over which cells will express it, in what amount, and for how long. Hey, people, they're out there. In the 16th century, they lived a guy called Paracelsus, and already he knew in the 16th century, it's the dose that makes something a poison or not a poison. So already, because the individual effective dose, the individual produced, expressed effective dose was unknown. This alone would be reason that this vaccine platform should never have been approved. This alone, even if you have no idea about anything. I mean, would anybody take a sleeping pill where you don't know if it's the physiological dose or 100 times more? Huh? Playing Russian roulette with such a sleeping pill? No. And you play Russian roulette with this. And another thing is, I explain it like a shotgun. It just destroys a certain amount of cells. Maybe in some people 1 in 100,000, in another one 1 in 1,000, in some people mainly the cells of one organ, in another one more diffusely. And the problem is, the diagnostic problem is, for example, in the heart, we can see myocarditis in MRI if about 1 gram heart muscle is affected. The heart weighs about 300 grams, about 1 gram we can see if they're 1 gram, but this is a localized damage. Problem is, this damage is diffuse. So if you do not destroy this 1/300th part localized, but diffuse in the heart, you won't see anything in MRI.
Yes.
This we can only diagnose if we have a sensitive, specific marker for myocardial cell damage, and this luckily we have, and it is called troponin, TNI. But why can we diagnose so many myocarditis post-shot? Yeah, well, we have this marker for myocardial damage. I'm absolutely sure if we had the same sensitive and specific markers for brain damage, liver cell damage, etc., we would find about the same amount of subclinical or damages of those organs as well. It's the myocarditis can be most easily diagnosed. You can diagnose it. Troponin you can measure within 15 minutes in your practice. You have the result. But we have not such a marker for diffuse damage in an organ, but it is this shotgun. It kills a cell here, a cell here, a cell here. It's not localized damage. Localized damage we can see in imaging, with imaging techniques, pulmonary embolism, myocardial infarction, myocarditis, things like this. But diffuse damage is difficult. And same is this if this diffuse activation of agglutination, thrombosis, activation of blood clotting in the smaller vessels. We cannot see it with imaging techniques. We can only measure it. And there also we have a not that specific, but quite specific and quite sensitive test to measure blood clotting, which is called D-dimer. And this is one of the first things we realized. We have to measure D-dimer in the people suffering from vaccine injury. And I found many patients with diffuse symptoms that had elevated D-dimer. I anticoagulated them, and after 3 months, the symptoms went away.
Wow.
This is not in every patient the case, but this is something that many do not realize.
It's probably got
measure D-dimer.
It's probably got something to do with the fact that a long time ago, these lipid nanoparticle people already knew that platelets and the liver were the 2 primary places that it went. I can only thank heaven that you and maybe as crazy as it is, the guy who more or less discovered the complement system, had he not been on our team, it's crazy to me how many doctors I talk to have no idea what the complement system is, never mind understand how that cascade might go wrong in this context. And so having Sucrit on our team was really... it's a miracle. If he wouldn't have been there, I don't know of anybody else who would have come to that conclusion on their own. I would not have. And it's a really, I consider it really one of the main diamonds in our crown right now. Had we not had him, boy, we would have been lost. And had you guys not had the same teacher, maybe you guys wouldn't have found each other. I mean, it's very much a network of people that we need to amplify.
He actually told us, you have to care for the patient. You have to follow the interest of the patient, not the interest of someone else or of yourself. You have to follow, you have to serve to the patient. This also happened here. We have not to serve to an authority, to a totally insane politician who has no idea, not the slightest idea what he's talking about, tells us physicians how we have to treat the flu. I mean, how insane is this?
So this good teacher was named Walter Siegenthaler.
Walter Siegenthaler.
Awesome.
Siegenthaler. This is his book, Differential Diagnosis. This is from when I studied from 1993, actually. But yeah.
Very good. Well, let's dedicate this.
There we learned something, and I always liked it. I was always a bit, as I said, curious. I was always I liked the work of a detective. I like Columbo. Columbo was a great detective. You know Columbo, for sure.
Absolutely.
Columbo was a great detective and he was a narcissist bastard. Can you remember? Always these blown up narcissists with their arrogance and ignorance, and they thought, oh well, this little inspector with his old coat, he could never do me any harm, and he destroyed them all. And this is the same nowadays. At the height of our age of narcissism that started in the 1970s, of course, all positions of powers are occupied by severe narcissists, and above them the severe malignant narcissists. I mean, look at these politicians, Boris Johnson or so. He even looks like a clown. He's not only a clown; he looks like a clown. And I mean, yeah, this we are living in crazy times, but I'm quite sure we are at the end of this age of narcissism, and we have to return into the age of authenticity. This is the most important. People, hey, most of you, we are great people, we are kind people, empathetic people. Come down to empathy, to authenticity. We must live in reality. If we live in Plato's cave, in virtual reality, someday we will collide with reality for sure. And this might be the end of the whole humanity. This might be the end in a nuclear war or so. I mean, the French president, Macron, they are seriously talking about French soldiers. Well, there are already some, but camouflage. But they are openly debating about the possibility of a war of the NATO between NATO and Russia that would end in a nuclear war. I mean, when I was young, you could not even imagine that there could be a nuclear war if it was not an act by accident. But nowadays, they are even talking about the possibility of a nuclear war. I mean, how insane and evil are those people?
Yeah.
Yeah, just, and as you said, you stated in the very beginning, you stated, as almost everybody colluded, there will be no savior, of course. We must all realize the savior is in us all, and the only remedy for this is civil disobedience. If they come and put on the mask, say no. Take a new jab, say no, just say no. If enough people say no, this is their end. This is their end. So it's as you said, we can spread the information in the legacy media, but of course we in the new media, but we stay in this bubble. And I also think in the personal contact, we must try to educate the people. And one thing we have to consider always, we must make our information suit the information state of the people. There are people around who still believe every word they see and hear in the news is right. This is like a child that is believing in the Christ child, the Easter Bunny, and the Santa Claus. And if we confront those people with the whole reality, as we have perceived it by now, I would never dare to say I know the reality or the reality. I know that I do not know the most important thing. But if you confront them with all this, they refuse. I often hear I can try to educate someone for an hour, and at the end of this hour he says, well, it sounds somewhat reasonable, but I simply refuse to believe this. I simply refuse to believe that such evil people even can exist. Hey, come on. There was Hitler, there was Mao, there was Stalin. Do you seriously believe they have all died out? Nowadays, they call Gates, Fauci, and the like. And yeah, you have to realize this. And for those people, it's a good idea just to start with spreading some doubts. We cannot educate them. They have to educate themselves. But, for example, one thing I will always remember, when my son was young, when the Santa Claus had left, one time he told me, hey, Papa, did the Santa Claus not wear the same shoes like Uncle Earth is Swiss name, who left before Santa Claus came in and came in after Santa Claus had left? So this is how enlightenment must work.
Yes.
Also, you and me, I saw World Trade Center Building 7 collapse. I thought, oh my God, what is wrong in this story as well? And then I became curious, and I was not afraid. I went down the rabbit hole, and this everybody must do on his current level of information. Or another possibility is, for example, you can spread out. For example, in Switzerland, there was the papers wrote there is overcrowding of the Swiss ICUs. Huh? But if you looked at the same date at this curve of the official curve of the Federal Office of Public Health, you say, oh, there is no overcrowding. The occupancy of the ICUs is 75%. And the same papers 5 years ago wrote an article, occupancy in Switzerland, ICU occupancy only 80%. This is uneconomic. This is too low. So if you show them something like this, sometimes you can spread some doubt, and maybe then people start to think, oh, should I really believe the yellow press? Or but this is the Federal Office of Public Health, something like this. Yeah, it must work like this. So we have also, if you meet some people, we must always realize first, find out what is the current state of information, and then adjust our kind of education to their level of it.
I think that's great advice. Find out where people are and meet them there, I think is really a great way to try and meet more people. I think it's great. I can't thank you enough for spending time with me this afternoon, and I hope we can stay in touch and I can have you on again, because I think this network needs to vibrate. We need to keep promoting one another and keeping it. And my stream is just starting to grow now, so I have a feeling there will be more ways for me to connect you with other people. So I'm gonna promote your. You don't have a Substack, do you? You just have a Twitter and you do your thing.
I have Twitter and the homepage. It's a lousy homepage. I have to create it once overnight when everything was vanished, was censored. But it's called Thomas Binder, in one word, thomasbinder.ch. CH is for Switzerland. Okay. I thank you, Jay. You do a famous, fantastic work as well. I mean, you are amazing, of course. I mean, it was an honor that you invited me here. So please, yeah.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate it.
Let's continue like this. Yep. And let's, everybody does what he and she can. And I always state, people, please do not only wake up, do also stand up. Give your spine a booster. As told once, give your spine a booster. And if you do it, if you resist, not for yourself, please do it for a life worth living for your children and grandchildren. I mean, I had a good life after war in the Western world, of course. Almost everybody had quite a good life. Huh? But what is the future for the younger generations? Huh? I mean, shall there be slaves? I prefer to be dead than to be a slave. What they want to have in 2030, and I always say I was never afraid. I sometimes stated, well, if you want to shoot me, just shoot me from the front, that I can look into your eyes. And this is what they are afraid of. If we are not afraid, they have a problem. Because their gaslighting mainly goes over panicking the populace. Works by panicking the populace. If you are not afraid, it's a large progress. And also in this COVID scam, I'm absolutely convinced that people sometimes died from panic alone, or at least it exaggerated their state. I have a friend who told me he has a friend. He had a sore throat. He got the PCR test result, and he suddenly turned pale, started to tremble when he got this result. And 3 weeks later, he died in the ICU. I see many people who have made such experiences. Panic is not good for your health. Not good at all.
No, not especially.
Try to calm down.
Yeah, not especially when you see the whole world panicking and everyone around you. This was terrifying, and they did it. They really did it to us. We got to wake that up. We got to wake young people up. I think that's the people we want to get at, because if we turn to them as older adults and say, hey, by the way, we blew it a little bit, and we should have spoke up. We should have stood up for you. there's a possibility we can still pull them out of the cave. And those are the ones we
You
need
are
to get
still
out.
young, Jay. You are still young. I'm old. You are young.
Okay, well, I'm still young and I got lots of work to do then. Thank you very much. I hope you have a great presentation tonight. Thank you very much. And I will see you again soon, I promise.
Thank you, Jay.
Yep.
Have a good time. Happy Easter. Bye-bye.
Happy Easter. Bye. Wow, fantastic. That is just absolutely fantastic. I don't know what to say other than that. This has been Gigaohm Biological, a high resistance, low noise information brief brought to you by a biologist. And I'm going to wrap it up right there because I don't need to do anything else. Thank you to Thomas Binder for being on the show. Thank you guys for joining me. Please share the stream. I'm going to leave it up on YouTube. If they give me a strike, I've got an extra one to spare. I don't know. Let's see what they do. I love you guys all very, very much. Thank you very much for joining me. If you want to share this work, it's a lot of different places. And if you want to support it, it's gigaohmbiological.com. Gigaohmbiological.com. Thank you very much for joining me. I'll see you again soon. I just did an interview with Thomas Binder. I'm telling you, things are happening. They're in a panic. They don't know what to do if we ignore them. So let's just keep moving forward, keep our arms straight. Keeping those arms straight.